Hi, everybody. Corrine Smith here again with another episode of Studying Thoreau, where I show you resources that you can use to learn more and study on your own the writings and life of Henry David Thoreau. Today is episode 11, and we're going to talk about Henry's travels deliberately, because Henry was not a hermit. You know this. I know this. The publishers know this because we have books that talk about places where he went. And we're going to look at a bunch of them today. And well, that's what I have planned. So my name's Corrine Smith. I was a librarian for a long time. I've done a lot of research on Thoreau, written a couple of books, and you'll hear about one of them. Currently, I serve as the supervisor of the Thoreau Society shop at Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. This is my own series. This is my own perspective of the scope and history of these publications and whether or not they're accurate. And all of the books that I mention are listed on a bibliography on travelswiththoreau.com. You click on bibliography on that banner on the website. It is also in a link down at the bottom of this page on the summary. Thank you, Marie, for that suggestion. So let's accept the fact that even though Henry David Thoreau was personally committed and strongly tethered to his hometown of Concord, Massachusetts, he did venture elsewhere during his lifetime. And often his intention on doing this was to explore a natural habitat that was different from the one that he had back home. We've already covered the travel narratives that he wrote himself. You know these as well as I do. A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. Walden, which could be viewed as a travel narrative on a variety of levels, including geographically and intellectually. The Maine Woods, Cape Cod, and Yankee in Canada, which is a book. It is not a series of 5 essays. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to share with you today are books written by other people who have followed Thoreau's footsteps into some of these places, and as well as a few more. And they wrote about what they did, and they usually included directions on how you could do it too. So these books can guide you into having your own experience of discovery, if that's what you want. Or you can be merely entertained by reading about what somebody else did. And that's valid too. And you might think, well, why would anybody do this? I mean, what would be the point? Are they just pretending? Are they just play acting, being copycats? Maybe that's not fair to Henry. No, I don't think that's it. I think it's a combination of being curious and looking for a closer connection. After all, we can read what Thoreau wrote and we can picture these places in our heads. But at some point we might say to ourselves, wonder if that's really what it looks like. Wonder if that's really what it feels like to be there. No. And if we're given opportunities to visit these places, then we can see them for ourselves and we can confirm our imagined impressions one way or another. And maybe we can even find new personal connections with Thoreau himself. Can we get closer to what he did? Can we see what he saw? Can we connect and get closer to him personally? That's what it's all about, isn't it? We really like this guy, and we like to read about what he did and what he saw and what he wrote down. We can't meet him in person anymore, sadly. We can't talk to him. We can't ask him questions. Well, we can, but whether we get the right answers or not is another thing. Anyway, maybe we can do the next best thing, and there may naturally come a point where we want to put the books down and go out and see the places for ourselves. You just can't beat a firsthand experience. I like the way nature writer John Talmadge assesses this approach. John followed Thoreau's path up Mount Katahdin in Maine, and he used to take student groups up there. And in a little known memoir called Meeting the Tree of Life, John wrote about one of those trips and his considerations as his group was descending the mountain. And this is what he wrote. We have left Thoreau's story behind. It gave us our bearings and set us on our way. But we have seen things he never saw, gone far beyond his footsteps and visions. So we encounter the paradox of all pilgrimage, which is that one's own journey finally displaces that of the saint or poet one has elected to follow. In other words, even if you shadow someone else's historic behaviors and actions, even if you start out by reenacting or pretending or play acting, eventually the journey becomes your own. It has to. John, by the way, John Talmadge is based in Cincinnati. He wrote the Cincinnati Arch. You ought to read it. Anyway, the journey becoming your own has happened to me when I've traced Thoreau's paths myself, and I see it happen to folks who come to Walden Pond. Now, since I've broached the subject, you should understand that not everybody who comes to Walden is a pilgrim who is in search of Thoreau. About 600,000 people typically come to Walden in a typical year. 600,000 people. Can you even imagine? That's just amazing. And here's the results of a survey that the park did in the summer of 2016. And I'm hoping you can see this really well. I'm going to hold it really close. Okay, let me get that. All right, you see those two? Yes, you see those two pie graphs? Okay, so the top one is where the people came from, and most of them are from the New England area, although 17% comes from other places in the United States, and 27% come from other parts of the world, most often Asia and from Europe. And then the second question was to find out their reasons for coming. This was summer, so 41% of the summer visitors were coming for swimming. It is a very popular public beach. And then you can see the other things there. 16% for history, 24% for Thoreau specifically. So that gives you some idea of who comes to Walden. Again, not everybody comes to see any part of what Thoreau did. It's a popular swimming beach in the summer. But a lot of people do come to find Henry. And so in a roundabout way, this chart applies to what we're talking about today, which is travel and basic geography. And we're asking the question, where did Henry Thoreau go? First around Concord and then away. And I should note that the map behind me here is specifically about his train travels. I use it whenever I give talks about Thoreau and the railroad, which is a deeper subject than you might think. And so it's appropriate to be our background today. I have, because of course, as you know, I'm crazy. I figured out all the railroad lines that he traveled on, and I drew them out on this map in red lines. Not sure the red lines show up too well. Yeah, he went beyond Concord. He was not a hermit. So Thoreau's Travels, the book I'm going to start with is from 1970, and it is a Thoreau Gazetteer compiled by Robert F. Stoll and edited by William Howarth. Technically, it is not a gazetteer at all. It's skinny. It is a specialty atlas is what it is. And what it does is it has small chapters for each one of the journeys that Thoreau made. Walden, a week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, Maine Woods, Cape Cod, Minnesota, okay, has historical maps, some that Thoreau drew himself, has historical pictures like this Barber engraving of downtown Concord, includes some historical photographs by Herbert Gleason. So there's the Minnesota journey. So traditionally, if you're interested in researching any of Thoreau's major excursions, this is the book you would start with. Came out in 1970, so some of the information now is outdated, and that we know many more details than this. But in 1970, this was cutting edge resource. This was all they had. This was the first time somebody had actually focused on the physical stuff and where he went and what he and the exact places where he went. But my favorite part of this book is at the end. There is a chronology of Thoreau's travels. Stoll and Haworth used Walter Harding's 1962 book, Days of Henry Thoreau, and they took all of Thoreau's journeys out of that and then put it in a timeline, handy little timeline, so that if you want to know when was his first trip to Cape Cod, well, you just scan through here, boom, October 1849, first trip to Cape Cod with Channing via Cohasset and Sandwich, return from Provincetown to Boston on steamer Naushon. And then they have the page numbers in the biography, Days of Henry Thoreau, of where that is referenced. Terrific, terrific little thing. And actually, my website, travelswiththoreau.com, I have the timeline of all the places where he went and what he did. This is where I started with that, okay? Again, a Thoreau Gazetteer, you may have seen it in used bookstores. The next one I'm going to show you is actually an online resource, and I mentioned some of this kind of stuff before. Back in the second journal episode, do you remember that? I talked about Ray Angelo's Botanical Index to Thoreau's Journal. Came out as part of the 1984 Corrine Smith journal, paperback journal reprint. And so Ray used to work with a Harvard University and the herbarium, and is a Thoreau fan as well. And so between botany and Thoreau, he does all of that. And Ray has his own website. This is what the first page looks like. Here's Ray. Hi, Ray. This is where you go to find the botanical index that I just showed you. And then over here, and I have highlighted it in yellow. It is not yellow on the website. And the website is www.ray-a.com, okay? And I will put the link in the bibliography. This highlighted part over here is Thoreau's place names, Thoreau place names. What Ray did is go around Concord and Lincoln, two adjoining towns that Thoreau spent a lot of time in. Initially tried to follow where Thoreau found a certain plant and where he documented it, to see if he could go back and do that, 150 years later. He took meticulous notes on all of these places. So when you click on that link, you get a 199-page PDF. I only have the first couple of pages here. Starts off with the credits and what it is. And then what you get is an alphabetical list of all of the places in Concord and Lincoln mentioned in the journal that Thoreau went to. And it gives you the journal entries, the references. It tells you if the place is named after somebody, because we're starting with the A's here. And so we're starting with Abel Barrett, Haywood Ditch, Abel Brooks Hollow, and Abel Hosmer Woods. He tells you who those folks are. It's just an amazing resource. It bogged down my computer. That's why I can't show it to you online. But I mean, it's a 199-page PDF, and he updates it. He just updated it in November of 2020. He's constantly making sure that it's okay. It's a terrific resource for starting. And if you really want to see, you read a journal entry, you really want to see where that is. Yeah, you can go and do that. Pretty darn cool. Okay, so that is a gazetteer. It's an alphabetical geographical dictionary of all the places in Concord and Lincoln that Thoreau mentions. And sometimes he's giving names to the places that don't really exist. Otherwise, Thoreau just made up names, created names for his own shorthand for what those places were. So Ray compiled all those details, and that's terrific. So thanks again, Ray, for doing that. All right, so we have those resources as a foundation. Let's move to our first destination, which is Walden Pond. In the very first episode of this series, I recommended this book to give you historical context, and I'm recommending it again. Walden Pond, A History by Barksdale Maynard. Came out in 2004. This place has a lot of stories and history associated with it, both before Henry and after. And of course, now it is a state reservation managed by the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Resources. It is open to the public every day. Like I said, not everybody who comes specifically for Henry. There are a few maps in here. There are some nice maps in here. There are some photographs. There's a lot of history. And even if you think you know it all, you're going to learn something with this one. Another book about Walden is Robert Thorson's Guide to Walden Pond, came out in 2017. This is the first real guidebook to Walden Pond. And what Thor does is he goes around to 15 different spots around the pond and gives you information about what's going on there. Thor is a geologist, so it's heavy on geology, but it really should be, because Walden Pond is a glacial kettle, okay? Henry didn't know that because glacial theory wasn't prominent in Henry's day, but I think he would have appreciated that. Okay, this book comes out in paperback or hardback, depending on how you want to use it. And if you're planning to go to Walden, it's not a bad thing to have. And you can use it as a starting point. Today, I am not going to cover books written by people who have built a cabin in the woods and lived as simply as possible, a la Henry. Okay, there are a lot of people who have done that. There are a lot of books out there that tell about their memoirs and their adventures, and we will get that to them in a future episode, which I think I am going to call More Went to the Woodsers. Okay, that's later. Back to books that basically reenact Thoreau's travels. And I'm going to stop here and say that they come in three flavors. The first is a strict narrative, where the author says, this is what I did, this is my adventure, this is how I did it, come with me as I tell you more about it and how I followed Thoreau's journey. Basically a memoir, a narrative memoir, which includes excerpts from Thoreau where appropriate. Okay, so narratives are the first kind of category. Second kind of category are guidebooks, like the one I just showed you from Thor, where you're given exact directions on where Thoreau went, how he got there. Sometimes the narratives give you exact directions too. Sometimes you have to glean them from what's written. But for the guidebooks, they get major kudos from me if they have detailed maps, major kudos. Locations are much easier to find with maps, and some of us need both text and graphic illustrations to guide us. And as my friends know, I don't use a smartphone. I use paper maps. So I appreciate maps in books. And I can also say that in publishing, unfortunately, maps can be very problematic. If the publisher doesn't have somebody on staff who can do it, then sometimes the authors have to draw their own maps. And this happened with me with Westward I Go Free. I really wanted 20 maps in that book. I only got one, and the one that I drew. And I write a lot of book reviews, and I often in the past have dissed authors who didn't have maps in books that were very geographical. And I now know how problematic that can be. I have heard at least one horror story from an author who had to sit next to a graphic designer to make sure that that person didn't just move a hill or a river around just to make it look nice, and actually put the hill and the river where they needed to be. So I understand how challenging this would be. So my advice is look for maps. Be disappointed if they're not there. In fact, if you want to write to the author or the publisher, go right ahead. I have done that. Yes, there are map makers out there, and yes, there are mapping programs out there, but not everybody has access to those things, and not everybody is adept at the practice. So, okay, maps or not, I love it when there are maps. The third category is quote books with a location theme, and I covered quote books in another episode. I didn't specifically talk about the ones with the location theme, and I'm not going to do that here because they're quote books. And these happen a lot for Walden and Cape Cod and the Maine woods. And I understand why, because obviously photographers are good at doing this. It makes sense. Take a quote from Thoreau, Go out, find where he said it or someplace similar, take a photograph. It's beautiful. It makes the connection. And then, you know, then the reader doesn't actually have to go there themselves. Okay, so it makes sense. And it makes sense that this happens for Walden, Cape Cod, and Maine Woods because those are touristy kinds of places. And there's a market for this kind of subgenre of quote book because the travelers are going to want to pick up something representative of the area and of Mr. Thoreau, but maybe they don't want to go to the whole thing of getting the whole book that he wrote. Maybe they just want a sampler of quotes and pretty pictures that go along with it so that they can remember the place too. Don't forget what I said with the quote books. Look for attribution. Don't just look for the quote. Look to see if it says where it is from. If it is from Cape Cod or Maine Woods, which chapter is it from? Okay, there's a lot of misquoting out there, misattribution out there. And I talked about that a lot in the quotes episode. Go back and revisit that video if you need to. So really, we're boiling it down to narratives and guidebooks. Sometimes they are a combination of the two. And since we started in Concord and Walden Pond, now we are going to work our way outward into the landscape of Massachusetts and New England. And we get to Walking to Wachusett, a reenactment of Henry David Thoreau's A Walk to Wachusett by Robert M. Young. In 2005, Bob decided to trek the 2-day expedition that Henry took with Richard Fuller in 1842, walking from Concord, Massachusetts to Wachusett Mountain in Worcester County, which is about 33 miles away, one way, I think. Okay, Bob followed what Thoreau wrote in A Walk to Wachusett, and he figured out which roads, probably historically and contemporary roads, which roads Henry and Richard took. And most of these roads still exist. So you can drive, this is mostly a narrative, but there are directions. Most of these roads still exist today, and you can drive them or hike them or bicycle them, but be warned, they are 2-lane roads with shoulders that are not very good. Okay, so it is doable. And you can follow his advice in here and how to do that. On the way back to Concord, Henry and Richard split up, and Richard went off to Groton, which is north. But on the way back, they were already taking a different route. And this is indicative of what Thoreau liked to do. He liked to make a circular journey so that going out was just as unique as coming back. And he wasn't just retracing his steps to go backward, okay? And you can see this in a variety of his travels, just general travels. Full disclosure here, Bob and I are friends, and we go walking on some of the rail trails in the area of northern Massachusetts. We hike on these rail trails that Henry used to ride over in the train, and that's pretty cool. And maybe someday we'll figure out how to take you virtually along with us on some of those excursions. That would be cool. Bob is also, he also has another book in the works that deals with Thoreau's travels. And that's all I'll say about that one for right now. So thank you, Bob. And Walking to Wachusett. Now, considering Thoreau's A Week on the Concord and Merrimack River, has anybody reenacted this paddling trip? And the answer is yes, several times that we know of. And one of the first ones that and the most famous ones that you'll know of, possibly, was by John McPhee, American writer, famous American writer and journalist John McPhee. And if you go on the New Yorker website, you will find his New Yorker article about it called Paddling After Henry David Thoreau, Retracing the Waterways of Thoreau's First Book, appeared in the December 15th, 2003 issue of New Yorker. I highly recommend that you look it up online. I will put the link in my bibliography, but I can show you. He traced it in 2003. He and a companion traced it in 2003. Look at this cool image of Henry going along with John as they paddle. Isn't that cool? Okay, yeah. So John McPhee did it in 2003, wrote about it for the New Yorker. And then we have, a year later, in the summer of 2004, David K. Leff did it with a couple of companions, and he called his book Deep Travel in Thoreau's Wake on the Concord and Merrimack. And not only does David provide a compelling story about his river trip with his companions, but he also begins by defining this concept of deep travel. What is deep travel? You can probably figure it out. But I want to share with you what David says about deep travel and his page-long description here, because it piggybacks on what I told you John Talmadge said about making the journey your own. At its simplest, deep travel is about heightened awareness. It is careful looking. It is paying attention to what is around you. Deep travel demands that we immerse ourselves fully in places and realize that they exist in time as well as space. A deep traveler knows the world is four-dimensional and can't be experienced with eyes and ears only. Deep travel is not so much a matter of seeing sights as it is sight seeking. It is a searching for the patterns and juxtapositions of culture and nature, and delighting in the incongruities left by the inexorable passage of time. Deep travelers revel in the wild, inspiriting call of a kingfisher as it flies over a couple of trolling anglers with Bud Longnecks in one hand and rods in the other. They savor the sight of a tree-shaded burial ground squeezed between big box retailers on a traffic-choked commercial strip. Deep travelers look not so much for scenery or enchanting objects as for a tapestry of comprehension woven from stone walls, retail establishments, street and topographical names, transportation networks, building styles, plant and animal assemblages, advertising signs, and other artifacts. Each element makes a statement about the landscape as a whole and the relationship of one part to another. Together, they tell a story. Deep travel is an ecological way of looking, where everything we see has a function and all the parts are related, no matter how seemingly disparate or contradictory. Like animals that remain intensely aware of their surroundings and any alteration to them, because predation or starvation await the unwary, deep travelers work to be keenly conscious of their environs. They strive for the alertness and acuity of wildland firefighters or soldiers whose survival depends on their knowledge of topography, history, weather, vegetation, and the observance of changes in minute phenomena. Such mindfulness simultaneously enriches experience and makes the voyager worthy of the journey. It's mindfulness, as he said, and that's what Henry David Thoreau was all about, right? Looking at everything more closely than his neighbors did, going well beyond the superficial. Isn't that what draws us to his work and make us want to approach our lives in a similar way? I say yes. So deep travel. Deep travel is a good concept to follow, I think. Here's another narrative of another river trip, or actually a set of river trips. In Conscious Stillness, Two Naturalists on Thoreau's Rivers came out in 1982, written by Ann Swinger and Edwin Way Teal. You should recognize at least one of those names if you're into nature writing, reading the writing of nature writers. Both of them are nature writers. Both were originally from Indiana. Edwin Way Teal settled in Connecticut, and Swinger based herself in Colorado. But during the 1970s, they paddled along the Assabet and Sudbury rivers in Concord and elsewhere. And they both had served as presidents of the Thoreau Society, okay? They both were interested in Henry, obviously. And so they made these paddling trips. And the Assabet and the Sudbury are two rivers that connect to make the Concord, okay? That's why it's called the Concord. It's a concord adjoining. Okay, and this is a narrative, Okay, they spent a number of different paddling trips, but right off the bat, great maps. Great maps. We have photographs by Teal. We have drawings by Ann Zwinger. I think she also did the maps. There are maps for almost every section, I think. Terrific maps. And so what they did is they followed the Assabet and the Sudbury, Thoreau's rivers, to their sources. They were going to do the Concord too, but Teal passed away. And so Anne had to finish this manuscript on her own. So I love, love, love the maps. It's a narrative of them going along the same rivers that Henry did all the time. And the last episode, my biography episode, remember I told you to read Robert Thorson's book, The Boatmen, which shows that Thoreau spent more time on the rivers than he did in the woods. And I still recommend that. Yeah. So this is a nice narrative. You're with two nature people. It take you along Henry's rivers in the 20th century. So we keep on moving away from Concord, and we're going to go southeast to Cape Cod. You know, Henry made 4 trips to Cape Cod, and he wrote that book I keep showing you. Naturally, some folks have followed in his paths there. By the way, if you go, be sure to stop at the Salt Pond Visitor Center, part of the Cape Cod National Seashore in Wellfleet. Their interpretive displays have a lot of Henry Thoreau in them, a lot, as well they should. And so for one narrative, we have Traces of Thoreau, a Cape Cod Journey by Stephen Maloney. Someone gave Stephen a copy of Thoreau's Cape Cod book, and even though he wasn't a fan at first, he was inspired to go and try to walk in the same places, and specifically model the 1849 walk that Henry made with Ellery Channing along the beach. Stephen was already familiar with the Cape, and this is the story of his experiences on 2 occasions to try to mimic that walk. And one he took on a Labor Day weekend, and the second he took on Columbus Day. Now, I have to say that the only place in Massachusetts more popular than Walden Pond on a hot summer day or on a 3-day weekend is Cape Cod. And Stephen decided to go there on one of the busiest times, 2 of the busiest times there would have been. So that plays into this narrative too. It is a narrative, okay? Maybe you don't want to do it exactly the same way Stephen did. But that's part of the learning process, okay? Part of the learning process. I'm going to talk about David Gessner's book, A Wild Rank Place, 1 year on Cape Cod. David was meeting a couple of personal challenges, and so he sequestered himself on Cape Cod for a year. And so the 12 essays in here are mostly about the things that he was going through, but one of them is called Following Thoreau, and he basically does the same kind of walk that Stephen Maloney did. And of course, he even takes his title from Thoreau because Henry described Cape Cod as a wild, rank place. That's how he described the habitat of Cape Cod. So this is another narrative example. Now, I debated whether to show you this one or not because I specifically told you I wasn't going to show you quote books. And this isn't really a quote book, an illustrated quote book. It's Thoreau's Cape Cod. I told you there's a lot of these out there. This is with the photographs of Herbert W. Gleason. He is one of the photographers from the turn of the last century who went around, actually, I think he's the primary one, including Hosmer, went around and found the places that Thoreau mentioned and took black and white photos of them. So what we have here is an introduction, a lengthy introduction by Thea Wheelwright, and then excerpts from Thoreau's Cape Cod with Gleason's photographs. And so I'm showing you these because Gleason is a key part of the Thoreauvian story. If you don't know about him, in the quotes episode, I told you to read Dale Schwee's book, his biography of Gleason, Taking Sides with the Sun. Fascinating guy, not only following Thoreau, but also taking photographs of national parks, which now this is. And you know what you could do? You could be inspired, since these were taken a century ago, You could be inspired to go back to these places and do a then and now comparison and take your own photographs. Ooh, that would be cool. That would be cool. Again, there are a lot of Cape Cod Thoreau quote and photograph books out there. You can decide whether or not you need any, okay? But that's Gleason, that's historical. So I make the exception on that one. Now, the only true guidebook I have found in this area is In the Footsteps of Thoreau, 25 Historic and Nature Walks on Cape Cod by Adam Gamble. Came out in 1997. Yes, 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 this is exactly what I want. Maps, directions, excerpts. There's Henry, little Henry. Drawings of plants that you're going to see along the way. Maps, detailed directions, places, people and places that you will meet on the beach or on your walks or on your drives that Thoreau would have seen. This is a guidebook. I love it. You can arm yourself with this book and you will be set to follow Henry's footsteps anywhere on Cape Cod. You will also see history. You will also see lots of natural habitat. This book is sadly out of print, and there are used copies out there. Please be warned, one online vendor is trying to sell one for more than $100. Do not grab at that dangling carrot. You can get it for a lot less. It's a wonderful book. Do not spend $100 for it. If you have to, check it out of a library system and make copies of the pages that most interest you. But this is what I love. This is what I love. Came out in 1997, so it's more than 20 years old. Anybody out there want to update it? Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? You would have a wonderful time and you would do a good service for us, okay? With the same maps, maybe? Can I ask you to do the maps? Anyway, Adam Gamble, In the Footsteps of Thoreau, came out in 1997. If you're going to go to the Cape, you got to do that. Let's move away from those wild rank beaches of Cape Cod and venture up into the mountains of New England. And here, my favorites were compiled by Thoreau fan and Professor Emeritus William Howarth of Princeton University. And we have Thoreau in the Mountains with writings by Henry David Thoreau, came out in 1982, and Walking with Thoreau, A Literary Guide to the Mountains of New England, came out in 2001. Basically, the same exact book, okay? 1982, 2001. What Howarth does, what Will does, is he attacks 10 different mountains that Henry climbed. And for each one, he gives us an introduction. He gives us excerpts of what Thoreau wrote about the mountains, and then he gives us detailed road directions and more on how to follow Henry's routes. And so the 10 mountains are in Massachusetts, Wachusett and Greylock; in Maine, Katahdin and Kineo; in Vermont and New Hampshire, Wentastiquet, Fall Mountain, Mount Washington, Tuckerman Ravine, Mount Lafayette, and Monadnock. So these are basically the same book, except of course there's a bibliography at the end of each book, and that's been updated in the newer one. In the older one, what makes the difference is that he's got old-timey engravings and illustrations that are wonderful. And he has lots of Thoreau excerpts. And when he gives you the directions, those are indented, okay? And so those are really the basic differences. Like I said, he has these old-timey, and I like the old-timey ones. Again, you could go back to these places now and take then and now photographs. Oh boy. And for each one, he starts with a map, and it's a good one. Yes, thank you, Will. I love this. Okay, so in the newer update, they decided not to put the old-timey illustrations in, sadly, but at least there's one on the cover, okay? I like that one better because that's the one I bought. But yeah, if you're doing this now, this is more up to date with the bibliography in the back. So they took out the pictures, And to offset the directions, they put it within a lined section so that you can more easily find the directions within the narrative. So it's mostly a narrative of what Thoreau's doing. And actually, I mean, look at the titles too. It wasn't exactly clear with Thoreau in the Mountains, Writings by Henry David Thoreau, that this was a guidebook. Okay, this sounds just like excerpts and not directions. This is more accurate, a literary guide to the mountains of New England, because that's what it is, okay? So the title change alone was a marked improvement. It reveals exactly what this book is. Like I said, I'm partial to that first one because that's the one I bought. So the library copy that I wanted to show you, I am partial to that one, and that's where my loyalty is. Anyway, any Will Howarth book in Thoreauviana is a good one, okay? Another person who created a guidebook for Thoreau's mountains is John Gibson of Maine, In High Places with Henry David Thoreau, a hiker's guide with routes and maps. Came out in 2013. It is a guidebook, and it's more compact than Howarth's books. You could take it with you. You could take that little one, the 2001 one with you too. He addresses 12 mountain hikes. He divides Mount Washington and Mount Monadnock into two different ones that Will doesn't do at first. And then he and Will differ on some of the lesser hikes, shall we say. And so he introduces each one, gives details of what Thoreau did, and then details on how to do it, lengthy ones. And there are maps, and they are good. And there are photographs, and they are good. Okay, so it's a combination. Well, it's a guidebook. Okay, it's a guidebook. Relevant Thoreau quotes, not lengthy excerpts like Howarth did, and not old-timey pictures. So In High Places is another mountain resource for you. And maybe you say, well, you know, Corrine, I don't really want to just do the mountains. I don't really want to just do Cape Cod. Can't I just do it all in New England? Isn't there some way that I can do a smorgasbord of experiences? Well, of course. Searching for Thoreau on the Trails and Shores of Wild New England by Tom Slayton. This book is a combination of narrative and guidebook. Tom has 8 main chapters, starts with Walden Pond, just like we just did, ends on Mount Washington. Huh, there you go, from down to up. And for each one, he introduces Thoreau's experience with the place. He tells of his own encounters with it, which are lengthy. And at the end, he has a chronology, and there are maps. Haha, there are maps. But it's mostly a narrative. It's mostly his encounters. And that's what you kind of want to read too, right? At the end, he has a chronology, but at the end is where he puts his directions, tips on tracking Thoreau. And then for each one of his chapters, he tells you exactly how to go do it, okay? So it's a narrative and it's a guidebook, black and white photographs, some line drawings of some things, some drawings, but my very favorite part is his conclusion. Okay, we're going with, like, again, piggybacking on what John Talmadge said about making the journey your own, and David Leff talking about deep travel. Let me read part of Tom Slayton's conclusion. In searching for Thoreau's New England, I found Thoreau. Tracking him up mountains and along rivers and beaches brought me face to face with him in a way I hadn't experienced before. Walking with him as a companion beside the crashing Atlantic surf helped me assimilate really, the buoyant good humor of his writing in Cape Cod. Finding mountain flowers blooming in the White Mountains precisely where he described them blooming gave me a hint of his achievement as a botanist. Following his footsteps in Maine gave me some feeling for the great scope of his travels there. On Katahdin, fighting my way down the mountain and out of a thunderstorm, I felt the raw power of nature that impressed him. And in some hard to define way, my travels and reading helped me encounter his quirky, obdurate personality. My understanding of this brilliant, cantankerous man has deepened, as have my admiration and affection for him. In going where he went, seeing what he saw, and feeling what I imagined he may have felt, I've come to know and like him better. What more can you ask for? Okay. Searching for Thoreau by Tom Slayton. So how about Maine? We keep mentioning Maine with the mountains. How about Maine? Catan has shown up a couple of times in those last books because there's a mountain. Well, the more definitive books about Thoreau's time in Maine are the guidebooks by J. Parker Huber. And that's The Wildest Country, A Guide to Thoreau's Maine, and The Wildest Country, slight subtitle change, Exploring Thoreau's Maine. Okay, first one came out in 1981. Second one came out in 2008. It's an updated version. Okay. Parker doesn't put his own experiences in here much at all. So it's a history. It's there are maps. There are black and white photographs. So it talks about all three of Thoreau's main trips to Maine, so to speak. Okay. The differences between the two. I mean, 1981 to 2008. There's a lot of differences. The main visual differences it's in the pictures because the second one is in all color. Okay. Different pictures too. They didn't just go back and more. They didn't just go back and do the same ones. Okay. The second edition is in full color, but my very favorite part of this book is where I have, oh, and look at the maps in the second one. Oh my goodness. My very favorite part is at the beginning in the introduction where he talks about the three, he has a grid for each of the three journeys, a spreadsheet. And what these all do is they list the dates of the journey, like the first one in 1846 from up to August 31st to September 11th. One line for each day tells you where they started, what kind of mode of transportation they took, like on foot or a bateau or by train or horse and buggy or a steamer, and where they ended up that day. This is what you need. It's a timeline of the trip, the three of them. There's the first two. There's the third one. That's what I love. That's why there's a bookmark in there. Okay. It's an invaluable resource. It's what I refer to. Again, when I was figuring out, I love Thoreau's travels as a topic. When I'm figuring it out, that's invaluable to know exactly where they were on a certain day. And Parker figured that out. Okay. If the first edition of this book is available to you, you could go with it. If it's easily available to you, you find a lot of used copies of them out there. But if you're really interested in these main trips, get the second one, full color, updated information. And if you really want to follow Thoreau's trips in Maine, there are maps. The Thoreau Wabanaki Trail was established a couple of years ago. And these are maps from our friends at Maine Woods Forever and the University of Maine Press. And they are of National Geographic quality. And they feel good in your hands. They are laminated paper. And they show you exactly where Thoreau went on all of these. The first one is a general one, Thoreau Wabanaki Trail. The second one is on the east branch of the Penobscot River and is more detailed, obviously, for that. That's what you do. You really want to. And there's been a lot of interest, both the native peoples and other Thoreau followers up in Maine. So the Thoreau Wabanaki Trail. Okay. If you would rather live vicariously through someone else's trip who follows Thoreau in Maine, got David K. Leffigan, and this is Canoeing Maine's Legendary Allagash, Thoreau, Romance, and Survival of the Wild. Came out in 2016. But it's really about a river trip that David and a then girlfriend took in 1983. David has been meticulous about keeping a journal all of his adult life. And this is one of the many things that I admire about him. I can't do that. I haven't done that. And he gleaned this material from the notes that he kept in the 1980s. So it's very cool. The culture takes you back to the 1980s. It's a narrative. You get to figure out what they were doing. And it's got a lot of, and David and Alice on this excursion. It's got a lot of historical context and Thoreau references thrown in for good measure. So there you go. You don't have to do it yourself. You can go with David and Alice. So thanks, David. Yeah, that's it for New England. Now, if you know me or you've watched any of these videos, you know that I wrote a book about Thoreau's journey to Minnesota in 1861. Westward I Go Free, Tracing Thoreau's Last Journey, where he spent 2 months, 2 weeks going out, a month in Minnesota, 2 weeks coming back, and with Horace Mann Jr. And it's a fat book because I wanted to tell it all. And I wanted to do what the best of these books did. Okay, I wanted to provide a narrative. I wanted to tell what they did. I wanted to tell the history of the place, have my own Thoreauvian adventure there as a memoir piece, an adventure, my own firsthand experience, and give you directions at the end of each chapter. I divided the 2-month trip into 19 chapters, and for each one got all of those things that I mentioned. And then at the end of each chapter, when you go, exact directions on how to find the train tracks or the trail that's left behind them and all that kind of stuff. So yes, that was a lot. And full disclosure, yes, I traveled the whole route by car, walked some of it. I did not sail over Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. I did get somebody who did to tell me what that was like. I looked longingly at them across the water, but you know, no, I didn't do that. So that's if you know. Henry didn't have a chance to write about it, so I took the opportunity to do this. And thank you again to Abby Rohr, who provided the line drawing of 1861 Henry on the cover. And yes, that's the railroad tracks by Walden that I took. Okay. So it was during this trip in 1861 that Henry spent a few days on Mackinac Island, which the mitten of Michigan, Mackinac Island's right up here between Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, okay? And in 2017, the Mackinac Arts Council produced Thoreau at Mackinac, selected writings of Henry David Thoreau with poetry and prose from Mackinac Island. So this is a travel book, but it's sort of not even a guidebook or a narrative. Talks about, it gives you Thoreau's notes, how he spent his time on Mackinac, and then poetry and prose from people who live there or have an association with Mackinac. One of my poems is in it. I showed you this during the poetry episode. Okay, so his legacy lives on in these places where he went. Okay, so we're winding down here, as you can tell. We've covered as much of the country as Henry has. And maybe you're saying to yourself, well, now, wait a minute, Corrine, I've seen another book in a used bookstore, and I've seen something called Thoreau as World Traveler by John Aldrich Christie. What's this all about? I thought he didn't leave the northern part of North America. Was he really a world traveler? Well, no, technically, on foot, no. Remember in the third paragraph of Walden, I know you have it memorized, where Henry said famously, I have traveled a great deal. No, it's good deal. I have traveled a good deal in Concord. Okay. There are at least two ways of interpreting this statement. One is the idea that he used deep travel, as David tells us. We know that Thoreau was always exploring the habitat of his hometown. Concord is a 25 square mile grid of land. And we know that he spent a lot of time in there, and he really did travel a good deal there. In contrast, John Aldrich Christie contends that Thoreau's excursions actually circled the globe by way of the many travel narratives that he read. Okay, so this book focuses on Thoreau's reading and research rather than on his actual journeys. So there's a map that he says Thoreau went on all of those journeys just by reading memoirs of explorers, just by reading travel narratives. Travel narratives is what he read most of all, and he actually wrote them, okay? So yeah. Now, Christy, this book came out in 1965, and so I am giving it to you with caution, okay? Caution. It came out in 1965. Christy used Henry Seidel Canby's 1939 biography of Thoreau as his foundation. Even though Walter Harding's Days came out in 1962, Christy used, that was probably too late for Christy, he's probably on this mission already. He used Canby's 1939 biography. So, even though I like Canby's biography, Christy does talk about Thoreau's journeys in here at the beginning. Please confirm them with facts elsewhere, because he gets facts wrong. As a matter of fact, the Minnesota trip happened in 1861. He gets the dates wrong 3 times. Twice he says it happened in 1862. Once he said it happened in 1860. Okay, no. And he has this map of Thoreau's travels, supposedly. No. Most of these routes that he has written down are wrong, because he's going through it just from the narrative that he's seen and not comparing where the railroads really are and where roads really are, okay? So no. No, there's a lot of good interpretation in here. I read this book a long time ago. I have a lot of underlines. I have a lot of starred things. I have a lot of brackets, but I also have some X's at the beginning that say just no. Okay, so don't go with this for facts about Thoreau's journeys. The contention that Thoreau traveled the world by reading travel narratives, absolutely. Go with the interpretation and the analysis here. Not with the facts, okay? Please, caution. And his book is a predecessor to a larger work called Thoreau's Reading, compiled by Robert Saddlemeyer, which is a book we will talk about next time. Nevertheless, any one of these books could inspire you to set out on your own someday. Remember what John Talmadge tells us about pilgrimage. You can start by mimicking or retracing someone else's path, but eventually the journey becomes your own. Engage in deep travel like David Leff recommends. Follow Thoreau's routes, go, do, explore, or even if you don't want to follow Thoreau, follow someone else from history and see what you can see in the places that they were in. Take photographs, write about it, share your stories with us, throw in relevant quotes from the person, draw maps if you can, have someone else draw them if you can't. Let us know when you publish them, in whatever format you choose. Don't worry or feel intimidated that some of these people have already done it. Doesn't matter. Your adventure will be unique to you, and we will always have need for more footstep followers. Okay. Here's my final word of caution and summary advice. If you're going to write about any of Henry David Thoreau's travels, if you're going to speak about them in a formal setting or write about them in a professional way, then please make the trip yourself and go to that place. This is a primary pet peeve for me. Do not talk to me about what Henry saw and did in a certain place and expect me to respect your perspective unless you have been there yourself, unless you've gone to that place to see what you could see. I was once at a conference when somebody was giving a presentation about Thoreau's sublime experience on top of Katahdin. You know it, it's famous, contact. Okay, I don't remember this guy's conclusion. Okay, but when he was done, first member of the audience who had a question asked, "Have you ever climbed Katahdin?" And the presenter's answer was, No. What? There you go. Boom. Credibility for me right down through the floor. The person who asked the question had climbed Katahdin, and so he could offer and share a bit of how his experience compared to Thoreau's. And that was great. That was great. And you know, there is something unique about standing on top of a sizable mountain. I have not climbed Katahdin. I am not going to climb Katahdin. Have you seen Katahdin? I've only seen it from the interstate, and even then it amazed me. I had to pull over and say to Henry in my head, "Are you kidding? You climbed that?" Anyway, I have done Wachusett and Monadnock. I have climbed a couple of Appalachian mountains and a couple of the Rockies. There is something you feel when you are standing on a summit, when you are on the earth, but you're sort of not, you're sort of above it, and you can see tiny semblances of civilization below, or not any at all, which is what happened to Henry on Katahdin, and also happened to him on Greylock, as he talks about in A Week. It's chilling. It's chilling, and you're closer to the sky than you have ever been before. And unless you've been on top of a mountain, and it doesn't have to be any of Henry's mountains to understand what he's doing, unless you've been up there, I don't think you can relate or understand his mountain experiences in the same way, and why he was so drawn to mountains to begin with. Another time I heard a writer say that he deliberately did not go to the places where Thoreau went because he didn't want his own experiences to interfere with what he had read and what Henry had written. No, you've got it all backward. You can easily make all kinds of assumptions and come to all sorts of conclusions just by sitting in your living room or your kitchen and reading what Thoreau wrote and going only by his words. It's when you go out and you have your own experience in those places or in similar ones that it all starts to make sense and that you find the connection. So go, do, if not now, then someday. Stepping off soapbox now. Now, if you don't have the opportunity to go exactly to where Thoreau went, you know you can find him anywhere. You probably already do that kind of thing. You can go to another mountain. You can go to another swamp. You can go to another beach. You will see similar kinds of things. And that's the cool part. And wouldn't he want us to go? Wouldn't he want us to go? You can find Henry anywhere. And that is a very long discussion for another time. All of the books that I mention here, of course, are on travelswiththoreau.com in a bibliography, also in a bibliography in the summary downstairs there in the summary below. Wow, thanks for joining me on this episode of Studying Thoreau. As you can tell, I'm opinionated on this subject, and I like to go and do, and I like to see what I can see and compare it to what he saw. And I hope my comments have helped you. And if you want to go follow, do, and get yourself some good maps, draw some cool maps, be on your way. Do it. Don't just read it, go do. Next time, there will be a next time, I will present a few books that you should have if you are ready for an advanced resource library. In the very first episode, I outlined 6 sources for a basic resource library. And by now, with everything that we've gone through in the past 10 episodes, you might be ready for an advanced library. And that's what's coming up next. So in the meantime, feel free to subscribe to this channel with the red box, ring the bell in the top right-hand corner if you want to get notifications on when the next ones come. Post a comment below. I read them. I'll probably comment or at least like it. And if you've gone any of these other places, we want to know. We want to hear your experiences and how it was for you. Okay, till next time then, I'm Corrine Smith. Take care, everybody.